In spite of the fact that we have the vocabulary to discuss it, including the word genocide itself, the international bodies, the conventions, the proclamations, the most depressing and frustrating part of our work here at the Museum of Tolerance is that we have to keep renewing, updating, and making new films and exhibits about the genocides that take place today in our time, about the crimes against humanity, about the threats to the safety and security of humanity. Our esteemed guest speaker tonight, Daniel Jonah Goldhagen, has been grappling with these questions and challenges for more than 10 years. And the result is the book about which we will hear tonight, Worse Than War: Genocide, Eliminationism, and the Ongoing Assault on Humanity. It is about reconceptualizing, understanding, and finally stopping genocide. Before it was released, it already had extraordinary reviews, judged as intensely researched, convincing, and wholly original. It is scheduled for publication already in 6 languages, came out last month in the United States, Canada, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, will be out shortly, published in the UK, in France, Italy, and Spain. Worse Than War is the basis of a major documentary of the same name, produced by JTN Productions and WNET. We can look forward to seeing that on PBS in prime time sometime next year. It has already aired in Germany last month. Well, the film, which is the first documentary treatment of the phenomenon of genocide itself, Goldhagen traveled around the world to interview perpetrators and survivors, peasants and politicians, those seeking to obscure the truth and those devoted to uncovering it. Of course, we all know and recognize, and the museum had the privilege of hosting Dr. Goldhagen after the bestseller, international bestseller, Hitler's Willing Executioners. Before Dr. Goldhagen started writing full-time and speaking around the globe around the clock, he was a professor in Harvard University's Government and Social Studies Department. His essays and columns can be found in virtually every major prestigious publication. He's one of the most popular and interesting guests profiled on every one of the major talk shows, and he is an erudite and popular speaker around the world. Dr. Goldhagen actually has a plane to catch tonight. We are very grateful that he is here on this auspicious occasion, and look forward very much indeed to learning all that he has learned and thought about to try to make sense of the conundrum with which we grapple day and night, the horrific topic of genocide. After Dr. Goldhagen's address, he will take some questions from the audience. If you will kindly raise your hands and state your question very clearly, and then we'll all retire to the lobby where we can each procure a copy of this important book, and Daniel Goldhagen will personally sign it for us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my very great pleasure and honor to welcome to the Museum of Tolerance again, Daniel Jonah Goldhagen.
Thank you for your very kind introduction, and thank you all for being here. This evening, on the night in which we commemorate Kristallnacht, it is worth noting that Jews are, as we all know, the people of the book. And what that means, in addition to having the duty to remember and to pass on to generations beyond us, what we know is that what we must pass on is the truth. We are people not only of the book, but of telling the truth. And among the many things we do in Kristallnacht is we tell the truth. And so that is what I'm going to do this evening, tell you many truths that I think need to be known. And before I launch into the main body of doing that, I would like to show you a short clip from the film which we made, which is based in the book and which will be on PBS on April 7th of next year, which will set the stage for what is yet to come. And I would just like to say that in addition to thanking all of you for being here, I would like to thank and particularly note the director of the film who is here, Mike DeWitt, who has done more than a tremendous job in putting this film together. And so with that, let us please look at the film. All the people here murdered other people.
nubwo waba utarishe wagiye mu gitero cyishe waragiye urica ujya mu gitero cyica abantu bari batatu ujya mu gitero cyica abantu mu rugamba utarisha abantu cyangwa utarakoze gufatanya cyangwa gufatanya mu gufata no gutera inkunga abandi bantu babiri.
Show me how the person was hacked.
wanyereka se nk'uburyo ukuntu yateguwe
abona umukuru bufashe gutya nyine kwirukankana umuntu gutema gutya gutema umuco n'ibice ariko cyane ibintu byakoranye icyo gihe ni ibintu bakubita agaconcisha ariko umuntu mu buryo ko batema igitoki ko batema igiti umuntu aroroshye ariko igiti kirakomeye batema rimwe batema kabiri gaca n'umucukanye.
I've been thinking and writing about genocide for nearly 30 years. It's something people don't much like to talk about, and about which most of us remain dangerously misinformed.
Good evening. A new book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, a highly controversial account of the Holocaust.
The American Daniel Goldhagen says the excuse of only obeying orders won't wash.
A controversial book about the Holocaust, raising a troubling new question. Were Nazi killers helped by hundreds of thousands of ordinary Germans?
They subjected the victims to gratuitous brutality, incessant cruelty. So the picture that emerges is not of reluctant people who were compelled to do what they did, but people who agreed with the program, who believed that the death of the Jews was necessary and just. I've spent my professional life trying to dispel the many myths that cloud people's judgment and prevent us from doing something effective to stop the killing. Genocides happen in every corner of the world, to every type of people. The numbers in the past 100 years are staggering. The Turks slaughtered more than 1 million Armenians during World War I. In the 1930s and 40s, the Japanese killed millions across Asia. In the Soviet Union, the estimated number of deaths in the Gulag camps and beyond is more than 8 million. The Germans slaughtered 6 million Jews and millions more during World War II. In the 1950s and 60s, the Communist Chinese killed an estimated 30 million. And during the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge killed 1.7 million Cambodians, fully 20% of that country's population. Bosnia, Rwanda, Congo, Darfur. All told, in our time, there have been more than 100 million innocent victims of genocide. More than all the combat deaths in all the wars fought during that time everywhere in the world. Based on the human toll alone, genocide and mass slaughter are worse problems plaguing humanity than war. We need to understand why. As you heard in the film, our understanding of genocide is, to our peril, to everyone's peril, shrouded in ignorance, myths, falsehoods, confusions, untruths. and we need to dispel them. And what I'll do this evening is tell you of some things that should dispel some of these confusions and untruths. And I will do so in a very direct way, without any sugarcoating. I can't begin to tell you everything that needs to be known, but I will tell you, at least in a quick way, many such things. And in this film, you saw two truths, perhaps among others, a large-scale truth and a small-scale truth. The small-scale truth is in the person of Elie Nigarambe, the perpetrator who showed us how they chopped people up, how they hacked people. And the truth that he conveys is that the perpetrators are human beings. They're not abstractions. They're people who confront their victims and kill them in a highly personalized way, often face to face. And this is a truth we should keep in mind when trying to understand genocide, a truth that is too often lost in the abstractions and theorizing that persists or that is put forward insistently about this subject. People do it to other people. Individuals do it to other individuals. And then there was a large-scale truth. As you heard, more people have been slaughtered by mass murderers during our time, dating from the beginning of the 20th century, than have died as a consequence of conventional military operations. This is a fundamental fact of our world, a fact that every concerned citizen should know and which is virtually unknown to everyone. Once you know this simple fact, it should change the way you understand the world today. And it suggests that dealing with genocide should be not a tertiary problem in the international order, but a central, indeed perhaps the central security problem for the international community. And so we should keep this in mind as you hear the rest of what you are about to hear. Now, as I said, there are many things that need to be told. There are many things that I think need to be refashioned in our understanding of genocide, how they begin, how they unfold and why they unfold in the ways they do, why the perpetrators kill, how indeed they end. The question of how and why genocides end needs to be asked and answered systematically. And what ultimately we can do about them. And the first thing we need to say in order to begin to address some of these subjects is that a truth is that genocide is not something that is overwhelming, as horrible as it is. It is not overwhelming, it is not beyond our understanding, it is not even beyond our control. The way in which it is typically presented as some kind of eruption, some sort of human natural catastrophe that just erupts somewhere, or develops or takes place because ethnic hatreds spin out of control, or there's an escalating process which cannot be stopped. This is fundamentally wrong. One of the things we need to do is to reincorporate genocide into our understanding of politics and society more generally, and not treat it as being something separate, different from everything we know, and apply the same tools of analysis to genocide that we do to other large-scale political and social problems. And when we do, we find that it actually is, as horrifying as it is, quite understandable in the ways that other kindred phenomena are. We can make sense of it, and in fact, once we do, we can see that there's a way forward to doing something about it. We must tell the truth about the extent of the problem. You've heard, more people, more than 100 million, indeed probably many more than 100 million people have been the victims of genocidal assaults. It's a vast, vast number. But it's not just the absolute number of people that we need to talk about. We need to recognize that as bad as one thinks Rwanda was, and Bosnia was, and Cambodia before that, and Darfur today, the way in which we typically think about them is a series of isolated, discrete events, terrible as they are, that happen in these faraway places or seemingly faraway places about which we may not know a lot, that this is wrong. Genocide is a systemic feature of the international system in which we live. They occur regularly. Indeed, there's not been a time since the beginning of the 20th century when mass murder has not been visited upon our planet. And if it is a systemic feature of the international system, which it is, we should begin to respond to it systemically and systematically, and not in the ad hoc way that we do when a genocide begins somewhere. We say, oh my God, it's starting again, what should we do? So we need to start thinking systemically. We need to start thinking about creating or producing an anti-eliminationist system. We need to tell the truth about the nature of the problem, which is not even genocide. As bad, as horrific as genocide is, it is not the fundamental problem we should be focusing on. There is an underlying, more fundamental, foundational problem of which genocide is but one expression, and that problem can be called eliminationism. Eliminationism is what it sounds like. A form of politics in which a state and the people supporting it seek to eliminate a targeted group or a set of groups or a populace which they find inimical or an obstacle or against whom they're prejudiced or whom they hate for a variety of different reasons. And so they set out to eliminate that population. This is a form of politics which has been common historically and is common in our contemporary world. And what happens when eliminationist politics is decided upon is that the perpetrators use a variety of means to carry out their eliminationist policies. And they include forcing the people to transform themselves, forcing them to convert, for example, preventing their reproduction, the group's reproduction, incarcerating them in camps, concentration camps, expelling them, and slaughtering them, the largest scale slaughters we call genocide. Now, perpetrators use all of these means to carry out their fundamental wish, which is to eliminate people. And when you know that in every instance we call genocide, the perpetrators have also used some of these other means at the same time, you begin to see yet more reasons why we should be focusing on the underlying politics and not merely on their instruments. And the reason this is important to reconceptualize the problem from being that of genocide to being one of eliminationism is because we should respond to all forms of eliminationism with the same vigor and force and ingenuity that we ought to respond to genocide. And if we would start adopting this way of looking at the problem, these not only silly but counterproductive and indeed horrifying debates that we have about whether it is a genocide or not in Darfur dissolves. It is a large-scale eliminationist assault of the kind we have seen many times, and that's all we should need to know for us to take whatever actions we can take and we deem necessary in order to prevent people's lives from being ruined and destroyed. So we need to make this shift to thinking about eliminationist politics and to emphasize that this is politics. They're not eruptions. They're not just hatreds run amok. They are a form of politics. And we know how to respond to politics, and that is with politics, not by throwing our hands up and saying, what can we do? We need to tell the truth about the commission of large-scale mass murder, which again we see in the person of Elie Nigarambe as he describes to us how they killed. After the Holocaust, the world became fixated on modern technology, assembly line killing, the gas chambers, which were, of course, at the core of the Germans' attempt to exterminate the Jewish people and their extermination of 6 million of them. But these implements of modern technology are not necessary and indeed are rarely used in the slaughter of people. In Rwanda, Eli and those working with him, an enormously large number of them, slaughtered 800,000 Tutsi in 3 months, mainly with machetes and clubs and other primitive weapons, in a rate of killing that exceeded that of the German slaughter of the Jews. What this suggests is that we should stop thinking about the technical means by which the perpetrators kill their victims, because it is rather easy to kill people, even at very large rates, and instead we should focus on what is truly important, which is the will, the desire to kill and to eliminate other people. When the will exists, the means are easily found. There has never been a time when the perpetrators have been unable to find the simplest of means to slaughter their victims. Indeed, during our time, the vast majority, more than 95% of those who have died at the hands of mass murderers have died with weapons that were created before, that were rather invented before the 20th century. We must tell truths about the perpetrators. I've already said some. They are not abstractions. They are not robots. They are not bureaucrats. Eli Nigarambe is not a bureaucrat. They are not moved merely by pressures that lead them to do things against their will. By and large, they have not been reluctant mass murderers, let alone reluctant torturers of their victims. We must restore their humanity and recognize that, like other human beings, they have views of the world, views which inform what they want to do and the choices they make in the circumstances they find themselves. We should stop treating them, just as we treat genocide, as being some kind of out-of-this-world, them out-of-this-world creatures, and genocide as an out-of-this-world phenomenon. In making the film, I found myself in any number of moments that must be described as surrealistic. In Rwanda, after interviewing Eli and others one day, we went up to the camp. He's a prisoner in a work camp. We went up to the camp where the prisoners were eating lunch. And after having already walked among them, you saw them tilling the fields. This was right outside of Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, which in itself was surrealistic, walking among them, having them swing the same implements they used to slaughter their victims: hoes, picks, shovels, machetes, and thinking, as I imagine anyone who knew what they were there for would think, that it would have been easy for any of them to turn on me and to turn on the others making the film and to do us in. Impossible not to think this. We went up to their camp where they were eating lunch, and they were eating in a large shed, a building that was perhaps 50 yards by 30 yards in dimension. And I stood at the center of their seating arrangement, which was a parabola, rows and rows of them. And I looked out upon them, being in a circumstance, in a scene that I never in my life would have imagined I would be in. Standing face to face with about 1,000 confessed mass murderers. There were no guards there, by the way. All of them looking at me, seemingly not entirely happy, and as we learned later on, they were not very happy with us being there. And I looked out upon them and I thought what I think is the right thing to think when one wants to understand them. Which is not, here is 1,000 mass murderers. That is the wrong way to think about them. The right way to think about them is, here is a mass murderer and another one and another one 1,000 times, each one working singly and in concert with the others to slaughter the people whom they wish to eliminate. 1,000 mass murders, an extraordinary scene, all human beings, all making choices. So the question is, why did they do what they did? Anne, a Tutsi survivor who was captured hiding in the bush by Hutu who used dogs to ferret her out, and others, she first had to watch the Hutu, in her words, kill all my children in front of me, and they slashed my right arm. Then, while they were raping me, they were saying, this is what the perpetrators were saying. The victims know a great deal about what the perpetrators believed and wanted. They were saying that they wanted to kill all Tutsi so that in the future all that would be left would be drawings to show that there were once a people called the Tutsi. That's what they wanted. That's what they thought they were up to. But why? Why did they want to do that? Elie Nigarambe explains that the killers, and these are his words, did not know that the Tutsi were human beings. Because if they had thought about that, they wouldn't have killed them. Let me also include myself as someone who accepted it. I wouldn't have accepted that they are human beings. Elie is emphatic that this view was not only his view and known, and it was not only known to him that others thought that, but that all Hutu shared this common knowledge. As I was hearing it, he says, I had the same perception as others at the time. No Hutu could swear and lie to you that he did not know that. And so what is the effect of these kinds of views? What is the effect of believing that they're not human beings? Elie explains. It is a cloud that came into people's hearts and covered them, and everything became dark, because to see someone standing in front of you without energy, and you hold your machete high or a club and hit him, it is something difficult that was done with a lot of anger and rage. I mean, this genocide. One person looking on another and deciding to raise his hand and to strike and to kill. In thinking about the perpetrators and trying to understand them, we must remember that they inflicted a vast amount of cruelty upon their victims, beating them, torturing them, mocking and degrading them. Cruelty that was in addition to or on top of the actual act of killing itself, for which the cruelty, for the simple act of killing, was not necessary. Not just in Rwanda, but in genocide or mass elimination after mass elimination, the perpetrators inflict an enormous amount of gratuitous, excessive cruelty upon their victims. Remember Elie's words. It was done in rage. They didn't believe they were human beings. Indeed, they thought the Tutsi were a threat to themselves, their families, their communities, their entire people. It was a fiction, but a wholeheartedly believed one, as has been the case in genocide and mass elimination, one after another, including during the Holocaust. The perpetrators believe, because they are ideologized or because they are beholden to great prejudice, that the victims are an enormous threat and danger, and so therefore they treat them the way they do. Not only must we humanize the perpetrators, but it may surprise you to hear that another truth is that we must humanize the victims. Now, I don't mean this to say that we need to have, that we don't recognize that they're human beings. Of course we do. But their individual humanity and what it means does get lost in the vastness of the horror, in the numbers we toss around. When we say they slaughtered 10,000 people here, or in this genocide 100,000 people, the perpetrators killed 100,000 people, and so on and so forth. We must recognize that each one was a person, and this goes for those who were slaughtered and those who were in other ways eliminated and brutalized, but who survived. that each one was a person deserving of our empathy and consideration as much as if it happened to someone in our own neighborhoods. Because in the vastness of the numbers, we lose sight of this. Imagine if someone were dragged from his or her home in your neighborhood and hacked to death in the streets the way Ellie described how they hacked people to death. Imagine the reaction not only of yourself but of your entire community, of the political authorities, indeed of our entire country. There would be wall-to-wall media coverage for who knows how long, weeks at a time. There would be an outcry that such a thing should never happen again. And yet when it happens to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people far away who don't seem to be like us, however we understand ourselves, or with whom we don't identify or sufficiently empathize, we lament it and say it's too bad, but we don't react with even an iota of the rage or the outrage that we would if it happened in our neighborhoods. We must humanize the victims. You must think, and everyone must think, about the children, the individual children the perpetrators are killing, and the individual men and women they are brutalizing. I've sat across from many survivors across the world, talking to them, interviewing them, hearing their stories. Until I made this film, I of course had talked to many, many survivors of the Holocaust, owing to my earlier work and to my own family situation. But in doing this film, I went to many countries and listened. And for those of you who have ever been in this situation with Holocaust survivors or others, and you hear them tell you what happened to them and their families, you think, if you yourself have not been through this, I can't imagine suffering for 5 minutes what this person has suffered for weeks, months, years, indeed, now for a lifetime. The pain and the loss is overwhelming. What do you do when a woman tells you, as a Cambodian woman told me, that all 10 of her children were murdered by the Khmer Rouge? What does she do? We must empathize with each victim as we would with someone in our neighborhood who is victimized. We must tell the truth about what starts genocides or eliminations assaults. I've already told you, they're not just eruptions, they're not ethnic hatreds that spin out of control. They're politics. And like other large-scale political initiatives that occur on a regional or national level, they are the consequence of a decision that one man or a small group of men make. A decision to unleash a genocidal or eliminations assault. That is how they begin. It's not all that is necessary. They have to have many willing people to participate, and circumstances have to be created for this to be a successful policy, but ultimately there is a decision-making moment. And it is shocking to me that this is not said and focused upon, because the people, whether it was an individual or a small group of people who made the decision in every instance to unleash an eliminationist assault upon other people, that person or those people did not have to make the decision the way they did. In fact, in every instance, they could have decided otherwise. These assaults are not inevitable in any sense. They are politics pursued by political leaders for well-understood political goals of power and advantage and to achieve cherished aims. And the reason it is utterly critical to tell this truth and to tell it again and again and again is because when you recognize it, you realize that you can change this decision-making moment for future potential genocidal leaders. so that they will not make the same decision that all those who have unleashed these catastrophic assaults have made. And this is what we need to think about, how to change their decision calculus. Because great hatreds and prejudices, no matter how profound they are, which may lead to riots and pogroms and massacres, never on their own produce large-scale, sustained, systematic mass murder or elimination assaults that take place over regions or countries. Only states and their leaders do. And we have to tell the truth about why it starts, and it's politics. It's politics. Let's start focusing on the politics of eliminationism and think politically. Now, we have to tell many other truths about how we react and how we should react to these basic truths I've been telling you. And there's a truth about what we do, and despite how it may be presented at times, what we do is nothing or next to nothing. The UN Convention Against Genocide, passed in 1948 in the wake of the Holocaust, which puts an anti-genocide program, at least in principle, at the center of the international community, has never once been invoked to save people's lives, despite the virtually endless string of genocides and mass murders and eliminations assaults that have taken place since then. The world stands by and watches as people die, get expelled, are put in camps in vast numbers, and so on. And we do nothing or next to nothing. Except, of course, we do pretend that we do things, and we do make pious pronouncements about what we will do or are doing. But the fact is, it amounts to very little. And we need to tell the truth about why we do nothing, and we must begin by talking about the cynicism of our leaders. Where national interests, as it's understood, govern what they are willing to do, which means that they don't do much at all. Because to do something to help people in a faraway country being slaughtered or expelled or otherwise eliminated by their leaders and those supporting them, by their country's leaders or those supporting them, requires that you expend some energy and effort and resources and political capital. And so far we have seen that very few political leaders have been willing to do this, because national interests dictate that it's not worth it and it's indeed the wrong thing to do. But it's not just the cynicism of our leaders. A basic truth, which many refuse either to acknowledge or those who know it are unwilling to say, is that the international community is actually set up to do nothing. The international community and the UN, or the international system and the UN, is more an enabler of genocide and eliminationism than it is a hindrance to it. That is the truth, and that is why so little is done. And if we want to think about how to save people's lives and reduce the incidence of mass killing and elimination, we have to confront this truth and do something to change it. And so we have to tell the truth about what is wrong. Imagine a naive person appeared and looked out on the world. This is what he or she would see. The strong and wealthy countries of the West, the democracies, the countries of North America and Europe, look upon a world of weak and poor states that commit mass slaughter and other forms of eliminationism against their peoples. And the naive person would say, how can this be? How is this possible? this equation simply doesn't add up. And it doesn't add up because the leaders of the West and the peoples of the West are genuinely against genocide and mass elimination. They do not want to see people being killed. They don't want to see people being eliminated in other ways, and yet they do nothing. And so we have to say, and say clearly, another truth, which is what can be done. And the answer to that is everything. The truth is, we can do everything, or if not everything, then close to everything. Take what I've told you this evening so far. It's politics. It's initiated by a leader or a small group of leaders who, in surveying the problems in their society as they understand them, calculate costs and benefits and decide that initiating an eliminationist assault will bring them far greater benefits than costs. And they're right about that. It's been a winning policy. So think of that. Politics, a small group or one person calculating costs and benefits, as leaders do. And that we need to respond politically. And we need to respond politically, very simply, by changing their cost-benefit calculus. And we change it by changing the real-world incentives and disincentives that they have. So what we should do is begin to create a genuine anti-eliminationist system. I've told you, it's a systemic problem of the international community. So we create an anti-eliminationist system. Right now, we have none. And any such system would have three components: a prevention system, an intervention system, and a punishment system or a justice system. Right now, there is absolutely no prevention to speak of. Intervention takes place only very rarely. That is, forceful intervention takes place only very rarely. And justice, we have the embryo of a justice system in the body of the International Criminal Court, which does good and should be supported, but it is much too partial in the people it prosecutes, much too slow, and therefore too late, and without enforcement capacity. So there is no sense in which it approximates what we would consider a real justice system, and by itself it certainly cannot do the job of stopping mass slaughter and elimination. So what do? There are all kinds of measures that should go into creating each component, each of these three components of an anti-eliminationist system. But the one we should be focusing on is prevention. And we should be focusing on prevention for a very simple reason. That, quite obviously, our goal should be that mass slaughters and eliminations never begin. And it should be that should be our goal aside from the obvious reason that that is the desirable goal, but also because once they begin, there's a profound sense in which it's already too late. The perpetrators can slaughter 10,000 people in a day. So if they begin, we've already lost, or more specifically, all those people who lose their lives and who are brutalized lose. So it is prevention that we should think about. And there are simple things that we can do that would begin to create a serious prevention system. Relatively low-cost things, far lower cost than intervening, for example. And in thinking about prevention, well, what prevention means, rather, is to create a deterrent. And a deterrent is very simple, having two components. The first component is that you make those whom you're trying to deter incur a cost that is sufficiently large so that when they think about undertaking the action that you want to deter, they'll think, it's not worth it to me. I don't want to pay the price. So a sufficiently large cost is one component of deterrence, and the second is that your statement that you will make them incur the cost is credible. That is, they believe that they will suffer the penalty. So that is what we must do. Create a credible threat so that the perpetrators, or the potential perpetrators, the leaders, will not make the decision to kill and eliminate the people whom they would otherwise like to kill and eliminate. And there are two things in particular we can do relatively easily to do this. The first is to use a successful measure that we undertook, that is NATO, in 1995 in Bosnia, which was to bomb the Serb forces after the Srebrenica massacre. And when NATO began a systematic bombing campaign, Milosevic came to the negotiating table in 3 weeks and the Bosnian genocide was over. Most of the countries that undertake genocidal or eliminationist assaults are weak. They have no capacity to defend themselves against bombing by NATO or by the United States for that matter. They don't want their military forces degraded. The leaders of these countries depend upon their militaries for maintaining their power. And even if the leaders wouldn't care, the military leaderships would be enormously reluctant to have their forces destroyed. If we would guarantee that countries which would undertake genocide or elimination assaults would be bombed the way the Serbs were bombed 3 years too late in Bosnia, but nevertheless bombed the way they would, it would give enormous pause to all genocidal leaders thinking about undertaking such a policy. If we had bombed, by the way, in 1992 instead of 1995, we would have saved the lives of 100,000 people and prevented the brutalization, systematic rape, expulsion of hundreds of thousands more. For any of you who might be reluctant at the notion of using military force, always think about what the alternative is, which is that the genocidal and eliminationist leaders and those serving them slaughter and otherwise brutalize the people they attack. The second measure is to raise the cost to the genocidal or eliminationist leaders personally. One of the ways in which genocide and related actions are conceived of is as crimes against humanity. And as bad as that sounds, I think it's a misconceived way of thinking of the problem, because these are not crimes. And notice the plural. It's not a crime, it's a series of crimes, crimes against humanity. And the reason, as bad as it sounds, that crimes against humanity is the wrong way to think about it is because it conjures up the wrong way of responding to it. Crimes are responded to by police actions. Crimes are also responded to by the police in the countries that are where they're being committed. When in fact, these are not crimes, but this is a war against humanity. The perpetrators have declared a war against an identifiable part of humanity, which is to make war on humanity. And when you know that perpetrators, after attacking one group of humanity, often extend their mass murderous and eliminationist policies to other groups, you begin to see the wisdom of why we should conceive of this as a war on humanity, which should therefore be responded to with all the means and force that we would use to respond to another kind of war on humanity, and not with the rules of police and law enforcement, but with the rules of war. And what this means specifically for the leaders of those who conduct wars against humanity is that they ought to be declared to be the enemies of humanity. There is an international legal doctrine called enemies of humanity which has been applied until now to pirates, and which holds that when someone is declared an enemy of humanity, he is subject to being killed. We should make it clear that any political leader, those serving in cabinets, high-level military or police positions who conduct an elimination assault on humanity, which we can define and for which we can establish a body to adjudicate, an international body that would determine when this is taking place, that all such people will be declared enemies of humanity. Make it known to them, and make it known to them what the consequences are, which, among other things, would be that they're subject to being killed. And in order to make that threat a credible threat, that it will be carried out, we should place bounties on their heads, sizable sums being awarded to people who actually kill the enemies of humanity, so that they will never believe that they can go to sleep without wondering whether they will wake up alive. Now, the purpose of this is not actually to go about to have people running around the world with hunting down others. It is to create a powerful deterrent to leaders to doing this. Now, I asked Tarsis Karugarama, the Justice Minister of Rwanda, a man who has steeped himself in the problems of genocide as much as any other public figure of our time. In fact, he has overseen a justice system which has processed 1.2 million people suspected of having participated in the Rwandan genocide, convicting 900,000 and releasing 300,000 or so. I asked him, if there had been a bounty system at the time, in 1994, would this have prevented the Rwandan genocide? And he said to me, definitely, 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 many times definitely. And he explained, if people knew that at the end of the day they'd be the losers, they never invest in a losing enterprise. Because genocide, as you correctly pointed out, is a political enterprise. It's a political game. But again, it's a power play, it's wealth, it's everything. So if people involved in it knew at the end of the day they'd be the losers, they would not play the game. That's for sure. I asked Haris Salajic, the president of Bosnia-Herzegovina, who knew Milosevic incredibly well, would Milosevic have begun the genocidal assault upon Bosnians if there had been a bounty system in place? And he said to me, I don't think he would have. And explained that Milosevic counted on making gains and keeping them because, as Salajic put it, the international community loves the status quo. Now, we must tell the truth about the impossibility or possibility of putting an end to genocide or mass elimination. Many people say, come on, what do you think? How are you going to put an end to this? It's been around for as long as humanity has. It's an endemic feature of the world. It will be with us forever. This is what you hear. If we had been here 100 years ago, and I'd been giving a talk in which I told you that we would put an end to imperialism during our time, you would have laughed at me. Imperialism, you would have said, was as old as humanity. It was an endemic part of the world. Indeed, the most powerful countries in the world were the major imperialist powers. And it would be with us for time, for as long as the eye can see. If I told you that war would stop being a principal means by which many states of the world relate to one another, you would have been incredulous. Indeed, at that time, or until that time, many people conceived of peace as merely being an interlude between war, and war being the natural state of the international system. And yet, War has stopped being a principal means by which many, many states in the world relate to each other. It's not even on the table. If I told you that human rights and political rights would be respected in many, many countries around the world, and indeed would become such a powerful public norm that even those countries which routinely violate them pay lip service to them, again, you would have been incredulous. You might have said, well, perhaps in the United States, in England, a few other places, but not in the world in which we live. It was not conceivable. And yet, all of these have come to pass. Now, I mention them because I'm suggesting to you that stopping genocide, reducing the incidence of genocide and eliminationism is at least as doable as putting an end or radically altering these seemingly endemic features of human affairs. I would argue that it's much easier to put an end to genocide and mass eliminationism today than it was to put an end to imperialism or to reduce the incidence of war as we have, or to spread human and political rights around the world. And it's easier because we've already done these. We've already done the others, and also because of a particular feature of eliminationism which I mentioned earlier. Just as it takes one man, or just as they are unleashed by one man or a small group of men, an anti-eliminationist system, its essential features, can be put in place, it can be initiated by one man or a small group of men and women. Our president and the leaders of a few European countries have the power to begin to institute an anti-eliminationist system. They literally could do it tomorrow. It just takes a few moral men and women. We must tell the truth about what is radical. I imagine some of you have heard the proposals I've made and have thought, well, this is rather radical sounding. And as I cautioned you before, I'll caution you again, think of the alternatives. These are people who are slaughtering and brutalizing others by the hundreds of thousands. The truth is that in the fog that surrounds thinking about genocide and mass murder, we don't actually see what is radical. What I am proposing is not radical at all. What is radical is the status quo. As we stand by and watch people die by the hundreds of thousands and millions, that is the most radical of all possible stances. Indeed, if you think of bounties, which many people blanch at, you should know that the United States has a bounty program. It's had one for a long time. Under both Democratic and Republican administrations, indeed, we have a bounty program which is overseen by Barack Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. And it's a bounty program that awards money for the capture or killing of terrorists. It's called Rewards for Justice. It has led to the capture and killing of a large number of terrorists, including very prominent ones. Why, I ask, should we have a program, a bounty program, for someone who might kill a few dozen Americans, but not have one for someone who kills a few 100,000 or millions of Africans? What is radical? And we must tell the truth, and I will end here, about our duty. Ask yourselves, each one of you, if Tarcís Karugarama is correct, the Justice Minister of Rwanda, that a bounty program would have prevented the Rwandan genocide, who among you would say we shouldn't have had such a program in place, and because we feel uneasy with it, or for whatever other reason, we shouldn't have had it in place, and it was preferable, it would have been better, as it actually happened, it would have been better for the perpetrators to slaughter 800,000 men, women, and children. Genocide and eliminationism, the principal problem of lethal violence in the world, is an enormously profound and serious problem which we must respond to with all the measures, including force, at our disposal. We have to stop being in a fog, in a cloud about what we can do. And if you think, when you think to yourselves, whether it would have been better to stop the Rwandan genocide with bounties or to let it proceed, if you do say it would have been better to have bounties at the time, then how can you say that we shouldn't have bounties in place to prevent the next Rwanda and the next Rwanda and the next one after that? Thank you. Go ahead.